And with that, then we're going to open the phone lines here. Questions?
We have a client that has been declassified. They are now an urban cluster. What is the reporting requirements for this coming year? Do they need to do an allocation plan or any other NTD reporting?
So the requirement to report to the NTD is not based on the urbanized area in which you're located. So these census changes do not change the requirement to report to the NTD. The requirement to report to the NTD is based entirely upon the use of 5307 funds.
Okay.
So they have to continue to report for any year in which they use 5307 funds. And then the requirement to report to the NTD also extends through the useful life of any capital assets purchased with 5307 funds.
So if they use 5309 funds, that means they need to do full NTD reporting for 40 years on their service, even though it's just one capital component, or a few buses over 12 years or whatever the lifespan is?
Well, you mentioned 5309 there.
Well, sure, 5307. Let's use 5307. They purchased with 5307 funds. You know, a bus or a facility, or if they still have some left over that they're going to use, they need to continually report at like you would report fully every year, or is there a condensed reporting for those funds? Yeah.
So I'll first just mention for everyone else on the phone that there is no NTD reporting requirement in current law tied to the 5309 program. And then in answer to your second question is there are a couple different options for NTD reporting. The requirement is solely that you have to report to the NTD.
Okay.
So that can be fulfilled through a full report or a small systems waiver report through the urban NTD if they have 30 or fewer vehicles. Mm-hmm. Or they can eventually transfer into the rural NTD program through the state DOT. Mm-hmm. So particularly if they're now an urban cluster and they're receiving 5311 funds through the state DOT, then the state DOT may begin reporting on their behalf to the rural entity. And then once that happens, that report does fulfill the reporting obligation.
Okay, so let me if you don't mind, I know there's probably other questions. Let me just repeat what you had said to make sure that we understand it. If they transfer to the rural reporting from the state on their behalf, it will fulfill the obligations of any 5307 funds that they are using currently and in the future.
Correct. If they get into the rural reporting system through the state DOT, then that will fulfill their NTD reporting obligations for 5307 funded capital assets.
That's okay. And then what about operating?
And yes, yes. So
Either or.
Either or.
Okay, great. Thank you for your time and appreciate the presentation.
You're welcome.
Clarifying question on the 5311 rule. If we have a service that's funded with 5311 inner city and the service's sole purpose is to bring people into the urbanized area, do we still have to, and there's no 5307 funds, do we still have to put that entirely to the rural UZA?
That's correct. If it's being funded through the 5311 program, then we are crediting it to the rural program.
Okay, just want to make sure.
Hi, we have two independent systems here. One runs in the rural area and the other one runs in the city. The city receives 5307 funds over $1 million. The rural receives 5311 funds under $100,000. How do I show a split and who gets the credit?
So you have two different systems that are operating?
Yes.
Okay. So it's not just one system with two different routes, right?
No, it's two different systems.
So in general, each system should have its own NTD reporting ID if they're two separate systems. That would be the first way of showing the split. And then if one of those two systems is only receiving 5311 funds, then it should report to the NTD through their state DOT.
Well, they report to the MPO, which is all under the same jurisdiction for both of them.
Yeah, so we may need to ask you to contact us for that, because I think that's probably the issue, is that you've got two, it sounds like you have two systems reporting to an NTD ID for the MPO, and
right.
What we would really want to see is that each separate operator should have its own NTD ID.
Okay.
So if you so we have the contact information there for Keith Gates on there, you can drop him a line and we can work on getting that, getting that set up for 2012. And then in terms of what to do immediately, the same rules would still apply. So you would take each of the services that are being included in that NTD report and evaluate what is the geographical area being served. So if that service is entering, you would look at the map for your urbanized area, and any service that's entering that urbanized area, if you can say that 100% of the passengers on that service are entering the urbanized area, then you can allocate it 100% to the urbanized area.
Well, that would be good because most of the urban area is entering the urbanized area.
Yep, and then if you do have a few services that are being funded by 5311, then those services you would allocate to UCA 0.
Okay. All right, thanks.
You're welcome.
I had a question regarding the UCA boundary. We provide service within city limits, and not all the incorporated city is within the UCA boundary. Does there need to be any separate accounting for the passengers, vehicle miles, or other statistics that are compiled outside the UCA boundary but within our service area?
So your report needs to be based on the urbanized area boundary and without regard to the incorporated city boundaries. But again, the thing we would emphasize is that if for a given route or a given service, all the passengers are entering the urbanized area at either the beginning of their trip or the end of their trip, then you can allocate 100% of that service. So you don't even need to necessarily take account of the physical location of each mile of service or each boarding, but you can look at the overall, what is this route serving?
Yes, question on the census maps. Is there a before and after posting of the maps, for cross comparison purposes between the 2000 and 2010 for a ready comparative analysis, so to speak? Is that?
Yeah, we have separate links to the 2010 and 2000 maps on the NTD homepage.
Okay.
Through the reference material. You can access the 2000 maps through the reference materials link on the NTD homepage.
Okay.
But there is no specific before and after.
Okay. Another question on the simple case involving Ostia and Rome. Mm-hmm. Now, under the old rule, the VRMs could physically travel in Rome must have been allocated to Rome.
Yep. So
that didn't allow for any splitting.
Yep.
As I understand it. With the new rule, how will that affect, will the software be adjusted to preclude any superfluous, what I'd call superfluous validation issues that may arise, since if issues may occur involving if everything is allocated according to the new rule?
Right. With the validation checks, some of the checks are going to be designed to just make sure, you've thought through what you're doing. So for instance, if you've identified an urbanized area as being served on your B10 form, where you have to list all areas being served, whether you allocate data to them or not, and then you choose, because of these new rules, to not allocate any data to it, we may still ask you as part of validation, are you sure that you want to do this? And that's just to make sure that we get this right. We only have a 2-week window where we have to get this right, and so that sort of prompt will be made. We may look at scaling that back in future years, but in some cases we'll ask those additional questions just to be absolutely sure, because this is going to go straight into the apportionment.
Okay. One last thing, John, on the timeline for implementation. You mentioned a letter describing, or there's a template that may be used for that. That would be the model to use for the letter describing the plan. We would follow that essentially as it's uploaded on the website.
Yeah, and that's our recommended format. For various rules, we can't absolutely require that, but that is a suggestion for how an acceptable format that would accomplish it. The big thing is that the biggest thing is that, again, because of a whole host of other constraints, we have this narrow 2-week window in which all 750 NTD reporters have to input their allocations at the end of August. And so we want people to be thinking about what are you going to be doing at the end of August before we get there. And so this template is a suggestion so that you take the time to think about how you're going to make your allocation in light of the new census, in light of the new rules. Also, it will give a chance to share what you're planning to do with your validation analyst so that questions can essentially be resolved. And then when it gets to August 15th, it goes really smooth and quickly because again, it's a narrow window, and it's a drop-dead deadline at the end of that window. If for whatever reason something happens that you don't get it in, then we start getting into all sorts of impacts that we don't want to think about.
I see. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, I'm looking at providing service to an area that just became part of our metropolitan UZA next year. We don't currently provide service to this small city, but we intend to. How should we handle that? Well, should we be reporting that area that would be considered part of the UZA?
Okay, so what we're talking about right here is your 2011 NTD report. So you should report all areas that were served in 2011, in your fiscal year 2011. And so your service allocations will be based on the areas that you physically served in your fiscal year 2011, with the caveat that imagine that these new UZA boundaries were in effect throughout your entire fiscal year 2011.
Okay, and is there opportunity within this next 10 years before the 2020 census to adjust the allocations?
Yes, so absolutely. So you actually have to do the allocations every single year based on the service that you provided. Now, we want you to use a reasonable and consistent methodology. We have had some people ask us, if it's beneficial to us in the formula to allocate the same service one way one year and allocate it the same service another way the next year. That would be an inconsistent methodology. So we want people to take a consistent approach, but the allocation does have to be redone every year because most transit systems will, of course, expand and change their service operations from one year to the next.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi. The question that I wanted to ask you is, how can you quickly, please, John, establish a difference between the 5307 and 5311 for me, please?
Yes. So 5307 is the urbanized area formula program, and 5311 is the non-urbanized area formula program, or what we call the rural area formula program.
Thank you so much.
I had two questions. One is, I guess the UZA numbers have changed. Is that correct? Because they were based on rankings?
They have. They're based on rank of population, and it starts to change pretty early. I think the top 10 may be the same, but below that, they're all different.
All different, okay. We have very clearly defined 5307 operations and 5311 operations, which will be a pretty simple allocation process as far as our fixed route service goes. Our demand response service is all over the county, and particularly in some of the rural areas. We can certainly do an allocation based on mileage, but in looking at our it appears that there's really no federal funding going into our demand response service. Should we still provide allocations for that anyway?
Yes. So once you become an NTD reporter, you must provide a complete report of all of your transit operations, regardless of the source of funding.
Okay, very good.
Yeah, we just mentioned that reporting services that you don't use your 5307 funding for, it may nevertheless benefit your area in the apportionment. So it's usually to your benefit to report all your services anyways, but even if it wasn't to your benefit, it is also a requirement that everything you operate you need to report.
Hi. Now I realize that we separate these two on the Form 10, the FFA Form 10, but is there anything in the change as far as when we're filling out the other NTD forms, the service form, vehicle forms, anything else, or that basically be reported on as we're currently doing?
So for 2011, all the forms that you have started with your report on are going to all stay the same, and they are all going to lock by August 14th. And so when August 15th comes around and the system reopens, the only forms you'll be able to edit are the B10, where you identify all areas that you serve, and the FFA 10 form, where you make your allocations.
So what I'm wondering is when I'm filling out my report this year, because you're saying August 15th, or August, but I mean, our NTD is, the final NTD is due in the end of October. And so when we fill out for the 2012 year, for my service forms and all the other forms, will I have to separate out miles and in all the operational statistics, or is that all just going to be captured on the Form 10, FFA Form 10?
Yeah, so you're one step ahead of us. You're thinking about your fiscal year 12 that's going to be ending on Saturday.
Right.
All of this is referring to your fiscal year 11 NTD reports.
Okay, so the one that was already filed and been accepted and everything. This goes back to that one.
We're going to be reopening your 2011 report on August 15th.
Thank you.
Okay. To come back and make the allocations on, and then we'll do a final closeout by August 31st.
Hi, my question has to do with, in terms of selecting a reasonable and consistent methodology. Am I correct that that method would apply to a given type of service, and so as long as you're consistent in applying it to that particular service, but if an agency is reporting on multiple modes or multiple services, there may be different methods for those different modes?
Yeah, that's the first that we've had that question. But I would say right now, for different modes. Obviously, we'll take a look at it when you submit. By the end of July, what you're proposing to do. I think we'll look at your overall plan to see that that it looks reasonable. But I think there could be reasons why you might want to select a different method for different roads.
The response could be very different.
Yeah. Yep. That's very true. So yeah, we think that sounds like you should be able to do that.
Yes, we operate a dial-a-ride, a demand-responsive program of about $6 million, and about 10% of that, or $600,000, comes from 5311 funding. The remainder is all local money. There is no 5307 money included. And thinking about the allocation, because there isn't any 5307, did I hear correctly that that should be reported entirely as non-urban?
Yeah, so that guidance was primarily based upon the concept of a fixed route service. If you're using 5311, to expand the coverage area of your demand response system, we would probably offer you the opportunity to do something similar to what you would do as if you were using your 5311 to expand your fixed route service to an urban area. So if you have some way of identifying, segregating that, say, well, 5311 allowed us to add 2 additional vans to our paratransit service, which allows us to cover this additional urban area, then all the service provided by those 2 vans, for example, that could be set aside as your rural allocation.
Okay, yeah, we definitely have gone through an approach to split out the rural trips from the urban trips, and I'm hearing you say we can follow that same approach in the allocating in the NTD.
Yeah, in general, almost all the NTD rules for demand response are designed. How can we make the demand response be applied in a way that's comparable to the fixed route? So obviously, if you had a fleet of 50 demand response vans and used 5311 to buy one of them, it would not be at all comparable to say that, oh, well, now all 50 vans have to be allocated to the rural. But by the same token, if you use 5311 to buy that one van and that van does provide a few trips in the urbanized area, the consistent approach with the fixed group is that, well, that was a 5311 van, so everything you're doing with that, gets allocated to the rural.
Good afternoon. I have a question about the paratransit service. We receive both 5311 funds through New Freedoms and 5307 ADA operating assistance for the service. And I've been splitting it up based on miles that are spent rural versus urban. But now I'm confused of which way it needs to be allocated.
So you have a demand response system that's being partially funded by 5311?
Yes, through New Freedoms.
Well, so New Freedom is different from 5311.
But it comes from the state DOT and so falls under all the 5311 guidelines.
Oh, right. Okay.
Versus the 5307 funds that we receive directly from FTA.
Right. Yeah, so the rule, that mandatory rule only applies to the 5311 program, the 5311 formula program funds. So if if you're using rural New Freedom funds, you certainly could continue to allocate that portion of the demand response service to the rural area, but the rule that we published in the Federal Register only creates the mandatory reporting for the 5311 program funding.
Okay, just the straight 5311. So it can still be split up based on where the service allocate the service?
Correct. So
not necessarily the funding type.
So the reasonable and consistent methodology kind of always applies, and the exception that was published in the Federal Register only applied to the 5311 formula program.
I think in the new law, 5310 and New Freedom have been put together.
Right. So
5310 is not 5311, but
yeah, 5310 and New Freedom will be mixed together too. So yeah, so the only mandatory allocation rule applies to 5311. So and so in the absence of that mandate, you can use a reasonable and consistent methodology.
Hi, I represent a MPO, and we get a waiver every year from reporting. So how does this affect us?
So right now, since you don't have any operational data to report, this really all applies to the operational data.
Okay.
When the system reopens, you will probably be reopened with everybody else. So you would just have to resave your B10 form identifying the urbanized, your urbanized area, and you probably don't have any secondary urbanized areas. So
correct.
So you would just save your primary urbanized area and be done. It should take you all of 45 seconds.
Yeah. Okay. So for the July 30th deadline, we don't need to worry about that. It's just when you reopen in August.
Yep.
Okay.
Yes. Right after this webinar, can I go to the FFA10 form and enter my data, or should I wait until? What can I do right after the webinar, please?
Well, the FFA10 form, you can't go to your FFA10 form because we have them locked down until August 15th.
August 15th, okay.
We'll open them up for 2 weeks then, so you have to wait till August 15th.
Okay, but after August 15th, when I enter the data on the FFA10, now when the NTD review them, would there be any questions, since we answered all the questions that we had and the prior data that we entered based on the other forms and everything else? So now, what will be the questions? Will the questions based on the FFA10 only, or we can have questions based on other forms that we had questioned previously?
Well, presumably we've resolved all the other forms except for a handful of agencies we're still working with.
Okay.
So really it would, but we would look at your response, and we'd look at your allocation plan and make sure that it was correct. Now obviously we don't have a lot of time to agonize over the details, but we will do that for every agency, so you could get questions.
No, yeah, I understand we can get questions, but the questions will be based mostly on the new data, on the FFA10, right?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we're in the urbanized area 2, LA County, and nothing has changed. Do we have to file an allocation plan on by July 15th?
Yeah. So well, first of all, the deadline, as we announced this morning, has been extended to July 30th for allocation plans. Okay. And the validation analysts would like to see an allocation plan from everyone, because that way it's just everyone is kind of under the pressure of this narrow 2-week window. So if we get a note from you saying nothing has changed, we're going to be 100% the Los Angeles UZA, then that'll be great. And it should hopefully be very short for you, and will be a great heads up for your analysts, so that when you do submit data, hopefully on August 15th or 16th, it'll be just snap quick.
Okay, so the initial one has been extended to July 30th. So it's just a general comment about there really isn't any changes. Now on August 15th, we have to proceed with what? Allocating the revenue miles and everything from last year, is that correct?
Right, so what happens on August 15th is the NTD system will reopen, your FFA10s will be live, and your previously closed out data will all be there, and you just have to input the allocation.
Oh, okay.
And so if it's a 100% allocation to UZA2, it should only take you a couple of minutes to do. And if the analyst already knows that you were planning to submit 100% to UZA2, that will make it go even quicker.
Yes, hello. I had a question. This touches on the small systems waivers. It was alluded to earlier in the webinar. And the question I have is it's actually two questions. How will this impact those agencies who have applied for and received small systems waivers?
The small systems waiver agencies still have an FFA10 form, just like the large agencies, so everyone's in the same boat.
Okay, now the second question tied in with that, John, is with regard to the small systems waiver, the basis, as I understand it, for this would be naturally to protect the integrity of the database. Having said that, it's my understanding also that agencies seeking and receiving such a waiver, the value of their reports are not, there is no allocation value resulting from the data in the NTD reports. Is that correct? From the vehicle revenue miles, the passenger miles, and the other statistics, it would be based on population density for the area where those transit systems would be located.
So the small systems waiver is based on whether you have 30 vehicles or more than 30 vehicles, and whether you have fixed skyway or rail service or not. I believe you're referring to the distinction between the funding formula for urbanized areas over 200,000 and the funding formula for urbanized areas under 200,000. And in fact, we have a question on the chat box about this. With the apportionments under current law, urbanized areas over 200,000 received a certain amount for their population and population density, and they received an amount based on their vehicle revenue miles, and they received an amount based on their passenger miles versus operating expenses. If you're under the 200,000 level, you receive a different amount for your population and population density, and then you might qualify for something called STIC, Small Transit Intensive Cities, which is based on having a certain threshold amount of transit service based on one of 6 factors, which may give you a little top-up amount based on your service. But but certainly the areas over 200,000 tend to benefit more from having high levels of transit service, but the STIC formula makes up a good portion of the difference for areas under 200,000.
Doesn't it also follow that it would be in the best interest of states to pursue full reports rather than the abbreviated 6-form small system waivers if you're going to accrue the benefit?
Under current law, a agency filing a small systems waiver is still fully credited to the apportionment, with the exception of not reporting passenger miles to the operating expense passenger mile tiers. And passenger miles are a component of 3 of the 6 stick factors. So in many cases, not reporting those passenger miles will have either no effect on the apportionment or a very, very small effect on the apportionment. And it's kind of a judgment call to determine whether the additional reporting burden of collecting passenger miles and filing a full NTD report would benefit you.
When you say very small effect, could you clarify that or put that into some kind of perspective in terms of a dollar threshold?
Well, so one of my favorite examples is that the smallest transit agency in the NTD is in the New York City urbanized area. The village of Spring Valley, New York, operates a single bus. The passenger miles generated from that bus will have a very, very small impact on the New York urbanized area formula apportionment. But each circumstance is different. It's based on how small you are relative to the rest of your urbanized area. If you're over 200,000, and if you're under 200,000, it depends on how small you are versus meeting the 3 passenger mile thresholds in the stick formula.
Hi, yes, my question is a quick one. The census maps that you guys have linked to off of the NTD site, are those considered final? No more discussions, that's it?
Well, we can't speak for the Census Bureau, but the Census Bureau is saying that they're final.
Okay.
If you were around 10 years ago, you know, of course, that the Census Bureau said that these are final on, I think, at least 3 different occasions. So we are going with what the Census Bureau tells us, and they're telling us that these are final.
I have a question. We have a rural transit agency that has moved into our UZA, and we just need to know, do they have to agree to our allocation plan, or as the designated recipients, do we just make the plan and submit that to you and they get the allocation that we decide on?
Yeah, we had hoped to have a representative here from our planning office to answer sort of question, but with all the breaking news today, we weren't able to arrange for that. So I would encourage you to contact your regional office, because that does apply to FTA's planning regulations, and that's not our area of expertise. In general, you are required to go through a coordinated planning process that involves all the providers in your urbanized area. And the specific ins and outs of what exactly that process requires is best answered by your regional office.
Yes, I have a question. In the past, if you have been splitting between 2 UZAs and now you jumped from a small UZA to a large UZA, what is the financial impact to now not split between 2 UZAs?
Yeah, there's no way to say in general what that impact will be. If you go to the FTA website, www.fta.dot.gov, under the grants menu, there's a link to annual apportionments. And under the annual apportionments, there's a wealth of financial information provided as far as what the unit values are that were used in the last apportionment. And so you can use those unit values to create some scenarios. It's like, well, what if our service increased by this much? These unit values would suggest this much additional dollar amount. Of course, it's always an imperfect calculation at best, because the 2013 apportionment will be based on a brand new set of transit data, a brand new set of urbanized areas. It looks like there's going to be a new law that will be passed on Saturday that may change the funding formula slightly. So there's no way to predict with absolute certainty, but there's certainly a wealth of data available that you can conduct your own analyses to create some scenarios about what you think is likely, and then you'll have to make your own decision. And that's why we really emphasize that a reasonable and consistent methodology is, we'd like to see your choice of split be made on a data-based approach as much as possible, and then let the funding formulas fall where they may.
Okay, but by jumping from a small UZA where it was based on population, and now a large UZA, the funding is allocated solely based on miles and hours, correct?
No. So all urbanized areas receive a portion based on population and population density. And so you can look at the unit values table, again on
okay.
And there is a different unit value for UZAs over 1 million, other unit value for population for UZAs between 200,000 and 1 million, and then a third unit value for UZAs under 200,000.
Okay.
So you can take those unit values for population and then take the unit values for population density and compare. And then you can add in that for areas over 200,000 to 1 million, there's another unit value for vehicle revenue miles. And you can apply that and see, oh, by moving up, we have these vehicle revenue miles that will now be applied to that unit value. And you can calculate that out, and you can kind of compare what kind of impact the change has for you.
Yes, hi. My question is just to further clarify the allocation between 5307 and 5311. We serve the rural area as part of our service, and we receive 5311 monies. We also use 5307 monies as preventive maintenance for the vehicles that are in that service. So I just wanted a clarification of how we should allocate allocate those services.
That's a great question. I think that you should be able to count the 5307 preventive maintenance as being operating assistance. Obviously, the local match for that will be lower, and so you'd run the same calculation as an example 2 that we used during the webinar.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And those slides are available on your website, correct?
So the slides are going to be posted through NTI as well as a recording of this webinar.
Okay, because you went through them pretty quickly, and I was trying to grasp them. So, all right.
Yeah. And you should have also received a copy of the a PDF copy of the slides prior to the webinar.
Oh, okay, great.
Hi, this is actually my second question. We have several clients that around the state, but one of our clients has a service that starts in one UZA, ends in their respective UZA. It's a commuter service. And 2 different designated recipients, 2 different UZAs. Is it best to then work with the other designated recipient to come up with an allocation plan, or how does that happen? You might have answered this through all the questions, but I'm not quite for sure if you did.
I think it's pretty much your call on this.
Okay.
If you want to work with them, you can allocate some of your service to that UZA. Otherwise, you can say that you're just serving your UZA and allocate 100% of it.
Right. It's probably best to go through which we did. We went through the analysis with the data units and try to maximize the value of the data. Is my understanding. I know you can't answer that. That's okay. I think that's what you told the lady a while ago, was to look at the data unit values to see how it best fits and how it impacts your community.
And reach your own conclusion.
Correct, yeah. Thank you. Well said. Thank you very much.
You might want to wait until the new laws come out and see what changes as well.
Right. Will there be data unit values with the new law, do you know?
Sooner or later.
Yeah. That could take a few weeks.
Well, yeah. So there won't. I have to be careful of what we promise, because obviously this is all happening very quickly.
Right.
But in general, new unit values are published concurrent with the apportionment. Because
right.
You never can quite tell in order to truly know what the unit values are, you need 2 things. What is the total dollar amount Congress is making available?
Right.
And you need the total data set of NTD data. Mm-hmm. And obviously we'll be working on the NTD data set through December 31st, mm-hmm.
And
Congress will probably be working on our fiscal year 13 budget up through October 1st, if not beyond.
Right. It's probably safe to assume it's probably better to use the data values because we need to come up with an allocation plan between now and July 31st.
Yeah, so we'll try and provide as much technical assistance as we can, but
sure.
we definitely need to really emphasize that we can't provide certainty.
Okay.
Right, well, this apportionment will be according to the 2013 apportionment would be according to the new laws.
Right. Which could, understand.
Hi there, yeah, thanks.
In our situation, we, as a state DOT, we have a few of our systems that are going to become UZAs, and as a result, we wanted to see when they have to start reporting. We've obviously reported the 2011 year. We wanted to see about the 2012 reports for the stuff that they do under 5311 in 2012, and if we report that in 2013 or if they report that and how that all works. Thanks.
In 2013, yeah, well, the next year, of course, is the 2012 reporting year, and
yeah, the key thing here is the requirement to report is not tied to UZA changes. It's tied to the use of 5307 funds.
Okay.
So their requirement to report to NTD will apply the year after in which they apply for their first 5307 grant, or the first year in which they begin drawing down funds.
Okay, which would be the 2013 reporting year in all probability. With that in mind, then, for the 2012 reporting year, would we report that, and how would you guys know which things go with the UZAs, the appropriate UZAs?
Yeah, so this is, basically the state DOT needs to coordinate with them, because any year in which they do not provide a report to the urban NTD, then the state needs to report on them if they're 5311 subrecipients. So the state should always presume you have to report on every one of your 5311 subrecipients unless you can confirm that for that year they're reporting to the urban NTD.
Okay, so yeah, that's basically us. And then you guys would allocate those statistics to that urbanized area, or how does that work?
We're still trying to determine what procedures we might implement for that, but certainly if your subrecipients are interested in having their data apply to the fiscal year 14 apportionment in particular, then they should apply for a 2012 urban NTD and file a 2012 urban NTD report.
Okay, so the 2013 allocations will not include these new UZAs in the sense of their statistics will not be part of what they get.
At this point, it's not likely that their statistics would be included. Because we just don't have anything set up for them to still report for 2011 to the urban NTD.
Okay, that makes sense. And then for the ones that already do report, there's an urban reporter that has one of our rural reporters that have basically absorbed them, and now it's part of their service area. So they would do an FFA 10 and fill that out, and we'd give them the information on the rural system they absorbed, basically.
So again, there's some really key distinctions here. Their urbanized area expanded, okay? That does not necessarily mean that their service area expanded. Their service area is the area in which they physically operated transit service. So that urban operator, their NTD report is based on the service that they operated and not what anybody else operated.
Okay.
So basically, each individual transit operator is a separate reporting unit to NTD, whether it's through the urban or through the rural. And that is a distinct, the operators are a distinct concept from the urbanized areas, which are geographical boundaries. Another question about how the 5311 mandated reporting rule goes. And basically, if you're using 5311, in general, you allocate the whole service to UZA 0, unless you have operating expenses paid for through both 5311 and operating expenses paid for through 5307. And if you have operating expenses paid for through both, then you can engage in the math problem that is done in example 2. I think that answers that question. So I guess we can take one last check. Did anyone call in at the last moment here?
Yes, just a quick question, John. The UZA numbers, the new UZA numbers, are those posted on the FTA website?
Yeah, they're posted on the NTD program website in the Census 2010 updates.
Okay.
And Keith here is just demonstrating again that you can, this is what the 2010 Census Adjustments link is from the NTD program homepage. And you can click to get the list of the template, you can get the mock FFA 10 forms, you can get the list of 2010 census urbanized areas. which includes the new NTD UZA numbers. So a lot of resources there. You've seen the contact information for the NTD Help Desk and for Keith. And you also should hopefully be able to contact your analyst for additional guidance. Go to these maps. And yes, so you can link to that NT website to see the link to the census maps and start looking at your maps and seeing what UZAs are in your service area and whether rural areas are in the service areas. We'd like to thank everyone for being a great audience. We were really excited with the high turnout that we had for this and all the great questions that we had. Anybody else have any other closing remarks?
I do. I'd just like to thank everyone for participating in the webinar, and thank you both John and Keith for giving out this important information.